Emma Rodriguez had always loved Tuesday afternoons. It was the one day of the week when her mother, Maria, worked the early shift at the diner, arriving home just as Emma's school bus pulled up to their modest apartment complex in East Denver. Today felt different, though special somehow. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves, and Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had praised her artwork during show and tell. The 7-year-old practically bounced up the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment, her backpack heavy with homework she was actually excited to complete. "Mia, go wash your hands," Maria called from the kitchen, with the aroma of her famous chicken enchiladas already filled the small space. Emma dropped her backpack by the door and ran to her bedroom first, eager to rearrange her prized dollhouse, a gift from her late father that she treasured above all her possessions. The miniature Victorian home sat perfectly positioned on a small table beside her bedroom window, which overlooked the apartment complex's central courtyard and parking area. As Emma carefully moved the tiny furniture around, positioning the mother doll in the kitchen and the father doll in the living room reading a newspaper, she hummed softly to herself. The late afternoon sun streamed through her window, casting golden shadows across the dollhouse's tiny rooms. She was so absorbed in creating the perfect domestic scene that she almost missed the commotion beginning 3 stories below. At first, it was just raised voices, nothing unusual for their neighborhood. Arguments between neighbors, teenagers being too loud, or someone's car alarm going off were common enough. But something about these voices made Emma pause in her play. They sounded different, angrier, more dangerous. She pressed her face against the cool glass of her window and peered down at the parking lot. Mr. Williams was there, the kind man who taught at the community college and always waved at Emma when she played on the apartment balcony. He was backing away from 3 men Emma had never seen before. Even from 3 stories up, she could see the fear in his posture, the way he held his hands up in surrender, clutching his worn leather briefcase against his chest like a shield. "Please," Emma heard him call out, his voice carrying up to her window with desperate clarity. "I don't want any trouble. Just take whatever you want." The largest of the 3 men stepped forward, and Emma's small hands pressed against the window as she watched in growing horror. The man wore a blue jacket that glinted in the afternoon sun. She could see a silver zipper running down the front. Another man circled around behind Mr. Williams, and Emma noticed the dark tattoo that seemed to slither up his neck like a snake. The third attacker was impossibly tall, and when he smiled, Emma could see his yellowed teeth even from her high perch. "This is for disrespecting our territory, old man," the tall one snarled, and Emma watched in frozen terror as he pulled baseball bat from behind his back. What happened next would be seared into Emma's memory forever. The 3 men descended on Mr. Williams with shocking brutality. The bat connected with his head with a sickening crack that Emma could hear through her closed window. The teacher's briefcase flew open, papers scattering across the asphalt like wounded birds. His body crumpled to the ground, but the men didn't stop. They kicked him repeatedly, their voices a chorus of ugly laughter and vicious curses. Emma wanted to scream, wanted to run for help, wanted to do something, anything to stop the nightmare unfolding below. But her body felt frozen, as if the horror had turned her muscles to stone. All she could do was watch as the man in the blue jacket rifled through Mr. Williams' pockets, taking his wallet and cell phone. The one with the snake tattoo grabbed the teacher's car keys and tossed them to the tall man. "Let's go," the tall attacker shouted, glancing around nervously, as if suddenly aware they might be observed. But Emma instinctively ducked below her windowsill, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it would burst from her chest. When she finally found the courage to peek over the sill again, the 3 men were climbing into a blue pickup truck she hadn't noticed before. The vehicle was old and battered, and Emma noticed with the sharp attention to detail that children possess that it was missing its tailgate completely. The truck's engine roared to life, and within seconds, they were speeding out of the parking lot, leaving only tire marks and Mr. Williams' motionless form behind. For what felt like an eternity, Emma remained frozen at her window, staring down at the teacher's crumpled body. A pool of dark liquid was slowly spreading around his head, and his papers continued to flutter in the autumn breeze, like messages that would never be delivered. She kept waiting for him to move, to get up and dust himself off, to wave at her, like he always did. But Mr. Williams lay perfectly still. The sound of sirens in the distance finally broke Emma's paralysis. Someone else must have seen what happened and called for help. Red and blue lights began flashing against the apartment buildings as police cars and an ambulance screamed into the parking lot. Emma watched paramedics rush to Mr. Williams, working frantically over his broken body before loading him onto a stretcher and speeding away. When Detective Sarah Chon knocked on their apartment door 20 minutes later, Emma was already hiding in her bedroom closet, wedged between her winter coats and clutching her stuffed rabbit, a threadbare bunny, named Mr. Hops, that had belonged to her father. She could hear her mother talking to the detective in rapid, worried Spanish, then switching to English as she explained that Emma had been playing by the window. She might have seen something, Maria said, her voice thick with tears. But Mia, she doesn't speak much anymore. Not since her papa died in the car accident 2 years ago. The trauma had changed her. Detective Chun appeared in Emma's doorway, her kind eyes searching the room before settling on the closet. "Hello, sweetheart," she said gently, crouching down to Emma's eye level. "I'm Detective Chun. I know you're scared, but a very nice man. Got hurt today, and I think you might be the only person who can help us catch the bad men who hurt him." But Emma just stared at the detective with wide, terrified eyes, clutching Mr. Hops tighter against her chest. The words were trapped inside her, locked away behind a wall of fear and trauma that seemed impossible to breach. She had seen everything, every detail of the brutal attack was burned into her young mind with crystal clarity. But the same protective mechanism that had shut down her voice after her father's death now sealed away her testimony, leaving the only witness to Marcus Williams' assault trapped in a prison of silence. As Detective Chun left their apartment that evening, promising to return the next day, Emma remained hidden in her closet, the weight of terrible knowledge pressing down on her small shoulders like a burden too heavy for anyone to bear, especially a frightened 7-year-old girl who had already lost too much. Detective Sarah Chun stood in the sterile hallway of Denver General Hospital, her coffee growing cold in her hands as she watched the medical team work through the glass window of the ICU. Marcus Williams lay motionless on the hospital bed, his head wrapped in white bandages that couldn't hide the severity of his injuries. Machines beeped rhythmically around him, their digital displays showing vital signs that fluctuated like a person clinging to life by the thinnest of threads. "Long has he been unconscious?" Chon asked Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the attending physician who had been overseeing Williams' care since he arrived 3 hours earlier. Dr. Martinez glanced at her chart, her expression grim. "Since the paramedics found him, the trauma to his brain is extensive multiple skull fractures, severe swelling, and significant bleeding. We've induced a medical coma to give his brain time to heal, but—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Detective, even if he survives, there's a high probability he won't remember anything about the attack. Traumatic amnesia is common in cases like this." Chun felt her heart sink. Marcus Williams wasn't just any victim, he was a beloved figure in the community. At 52, he had taught American literature at the local community college for over 15 years, touching the lives of thousands of students who couldn't afford traditional 4-year universities. He volunteered at the homeless shelter on weekends coached youth basketball at the community center, and had been fighting to establish a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. A kind of man who made the world better simply by existing. In it, what about his family? Chun asked, noting the absence of visitors in the ICU. His ex-wife lives in California with their adult children. They're flying in tomorrow morning, but Dr. Martinez's voice trailed off. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the antiseptic air. Tomorrow might be too late. Chun's phone buzzed with a text from her partner, Detective Luis Rodriguez. Security. Footage review complete. Meet me at the station ASAP. She took one last look at Marcus Williams' still form, silently promising the unconscious teacher that she would find the animals who had done this to him. Back at the Denver Police Department, the Major Crimes Unit was buzzing with activity despite the late hour. Detective Rodriguez had commandeered the conference room, covering every available surface with printed screenshots from security cameras throughout the neighborhood. The wall-mounted television displayed a frozen image from the apartment complexes. Main entrance camera, 3 hooded figures walking purposefully toward the parking area at 4:17 p.m. This is the best we've got, Rodriguez said, pointing at the grainy image with obvious frustration. The apartment complex's security system is ancient. Half the cameras don't work, and the ones that do produce footage that looks like it was shot through a dirty fishbowl. Chun studied the images, her trained eye searching for any detail that might provide a lead. What about surrounding businesses? Traffic cameras? I've requested footage from a 12-block radius. The gas station 3 blocks north has decent cameras, and there's a traffic light camera at the intersection of Colfax and Federal. But Detective Rodriguez's voice carried a note of warning. The quality isn't much better. These guys knew what they were doing. Hoodies, sunglasses, even in broad daylight. Captain Maria Vasquez entered the conference room, her usual stern expression even more pronounced than usual. What do we have on the Williams assault? Chun briefed her captain on the medical prognosis and the disappointing security footage. Sir, our only real witness is a 7-year-old girl who lives in the apartment complex, Emma Rodriguez. She was playing by her window when the attack occurred. Has she been interviewed? That's where we hit our first major obstacle, Chun replied, pulling out her notes from the earlier visit to the Rodriguez apartment. The child has selective mutism stemming from trauma. Her father died in a car accident 2 years ago, and since then she rarely speaks, especially to strangers or about distressing events. Captain Vasquez frowned. What does the child psychologist say? Dr. Sarah Martinez. Different Dr. Martinez from the hospital examined Emma this evening. Her assessment is that forcing the interview could cause permanent psychological damage. The girl needs time and specialized care to process what she witnessed. Time we don't have, Captain Vasquez said bluntly. Every hour that passes makes it less likely we'll catch these perpetrators. What about the family? Can they help us reach the child? Chun thought about Maria Rodriguez, the exhausted single mother who worked double shifts at a downtown diner to support herself and Emma. The mother is cooperative, but she's terrified of doing anything that might harm her daughter further. She's already lost her husband. Emma is all she has left. Rodriguez pulled up another security image on the television. There's something else, Detective. I've been running facial recognition on what little we can see of the perpetrators, cross-referencing with known associates of recent parolees and individuals with violent histories in the area. Any hits? 3 possibles, but nothing concrete enough for warrants. Jake Morrison, aggravated assault, armed robbery, released 6 months ago. Tony Gutierrez, battery, weapons charges, known associate of Morrison. And David Park, assault, with a deadly weapon, intimidation, also connected to Morrison's crew. Chun felt a spark of hope. That's our starting point. What's their current status? All 3 have reported to their parole officers as required. Morrison lives in a halfway house on the north side. Gutierrez has an apartment in 5 Points, and Park is staying with a cousin in Commerce City. But Detective, without positive identification or physical evidence linking them to the scene. We need Emma Rodriguez, Chun finished. She's the key to everything. Captain Vasquez gathered the scattered photographs. I'll contact the district attorney's office tomorrow morning. We need to explore our legal options for interviewing a traumatized child witness. In the meantime, maintain surveillance on your 3 suspects, but keep it discreet. We can't afford to spook them if they are our perpetrators. As the meeting broke up and the other detectives headed home to their families, Chun remained in the conference room, staring at the blurry security. Images. Somewhere in this pixelated maze of shadows and uncertainty was the evidence needed to bring Marcus Williams' attackers to justice. But the path to that evidence led through a frightened 7-year-old girl who had already endured more trauma than most adults face in a lifetime. Chun picked up her phone and dialed Dr. Martinez's number. When the child psychologist answered, Chun could hear the exhaustion in her voice. Dr. Martinez, it's Detective Chun. I know it's late, but I need to ask in your professional opinion, is there any way to help Emma Rodriguez find her voice without causing additional trauma? There was a long pause before Dr. Martinez replied. Detective, traditional interview techniques won't work with Emma. Her mutism is a protective mechanism, her mind's way of keeping her safe from overwhelming emotions. Breaking through that barrier requires patience, trust, and often unconventional methods. What kind of unconventional methods? Therapy animals, art therapy, play therapy techniques that allow children to communicate without feeling pressured to speak directly about their trauma. But detective, this process could take weeks or even months. Chun looked at the clock on the conference room wall. It was nearly midnight, and with each passing hour, the trail was growing colder. Marcus Williams lay fighting for his life, while his attackers walked free, potentially planning their next victim. Emma Rodriguez held the key to justice, but unlocking that key without destroying an already fragile child would require a miracle. Dr. Martinez, Sean said finally, I need you to help me find that miracle. A good man's life depends on it, and 3 violent criminals can't be allowed to escape justice because of our limitations. As Chun finally headed home through Denver's empty streets, she made a silent vow to Marcus Williams and to Emma Rodriguez. She would find a way to solve this case that honored both the victim's need for justice and the witness's need for healing. Somehow, she would bridge the gap between law enforcement necessity and human compassion. The race against time had begun, and Detective Sarah Chun refused to lose. The Denver Police Department's K-9 unit occupied a specialized facility on the east side of the city, where the sounds of barking and the commands of training officers created a symphony of disciplined chaos. Detective Sarah Chun pulled into the parking lot at 7:30 a.m., her coffee still steaming in the crisp autumn air. She had spent a sleepless night researching therapy animals and their use in criminal investigations, discovering a handful of precedent cases were specially trained. Police dogs had helped traumatized witnesses overcome their inability to communicate. Officer Jake Kane was already in the training yard when Chun arrived, working with a magnificent German shepherd whose coat gleamed like burnished copper in the morning sunlight. The dog moved with fluid precision through an obstacle course, responding to Kane's hand signals with an almost telepathic understanding. Chun watched from the fence line, impressed by the seamless partnership between man and animal. That's Ranger, called out Sergeant Mike Collins, the K-9 unit supervisor, as he approached Chun. 5 years old, originally trained for narcotics detection, but Kane has been working with him on victim assistance for the past 18 months. They're our best team for cases involving children. What makes him special? Chon asked, studying. The German shepherd's alert but gentle demeanor. Intelligence, first and foremost. Ranger scored in the top 5% of all police dogs tested in the region. But more importantly, he has what we call emotional intelligence, an ability to read human distress and respond appropriately. Kane rescued him from a shelter when he was just 8 weeks old. The dog had been severely neglected, which might explain his sensitivity to trauma in others. Officer Kane finished the training exercise and approached the fence, Ranger healing perfectly at his left side. At 34, Kane carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. His background as a military police officer in Afghanistan showed in his precise movements and careful attention to detail, but his eyes held a warmth that immediately put Chun at ease. Sergeant Collins briefed me on your case, Kane said, extending his hand to Chun, a 7-year-old witness to an aggravated assault who can't speak about what she saw. Emma Rodriguez. Her selective mutism is trauma-induced, stemming from her father's death 2 years ago. The child psychologist believes she saw everything, but is psychologically unable to verbalize the experience. Kane knelt beside Ranger, running his hand through the dog's thick fur. Ranger has worked with traumatized children before. Last year, we helped a 6-year-old boy who witnessed his mother's murder find the courage to testify. The year before that, a teenage girl who survived a kidnapping. But Detective Chun, I need you to understand, this isn't a quick fix. Building trust with a traumatized child takes time, patience, and there are no guarantees. Chun felt a surge of hope mixed with frustration. Time was exactly what they didn't have. But looking at Ranger's intelligent brown eyes, she sensed this might be their only chance to reach Emma Rodriguez. Tell me about Ranger's training, she requested. Kane's face lit up with obvious pride. Standard police dog training, first obedience, protection, detection work. But for victim assistance, he's learned specialized behaviors. He can remain motionless for hours if necessary, never startling or overwhelming a child. He's trained to recognize signs of distress and respond with specific calming behaviors. Most importantly, he creates a non-threatening bridge between traumatized witnesses and law enforcement. How does it work practically? We start with simple exposure, just being in the same room. Ranger lies down, completely relaxed, letting the child observe him from a distance. Children are naturally curious about animals, and that curiosity often overrides their fear. As trust builds, they begin to interact with him, and that interaction often translates into increased willingness to communicate with the humans present. Sergeant Collins added, the legal precedent is solid. Therapy animals have been approved in courtrooms across the country for child witnesses. The key is establishing that the animal's presence doesn't unduly influence testimony. It simply provides emotional support that allows the witness to testify truthfully. Chun nodded, mentally rehearsing how she would present this approach to Captain Vasquez in the district attorney's office. When can we start? This afternoon, if the family agrees, Kane replied. But detective, I need to set some ground rules. This process moves at the child's pace, not ours. If Emma becomes distressed, we stop immediately. If she needs breaks, we take them. And if at any point the psychologist determines that our presence is causing more harm than help, we walk away. The commitment in Kane's voice impressed Chun. This wasn't just professional duty for him. It was personal. What made you specialize in victim assistance? Kane's expression grew serious. In Afghanistan, I saw too many children caught in the crossfire of adult violence. Kids who had witnessed horrors no child should see, who couldn't trust adults anymore because adults had failed to protect them. When I came back to civilian police work, I realized that trauma doesn't discriminate American. Children face their own wars right here at home. Ranger seemed to sense the gravity of the conversation, moving closer to Kane and resting his massive head against his partner's leg. The gesture was so natural, so full of understanding, that Chun felt her earlier skepticism dissolving completely. "There's something else you should know about Ranger," Kane continued. "He was rescued from an abusive situation as a puppy. His first family neglected him, left him chained in a backyard without adequate food, water, or shelter. When animal control found him, he was severely malnourished and terrified of human contact. How did you rehabilitate him? Patience, consistency, unconditional positive regard, the same principles we use with traumatized children. It took months before he trusted me enough to eat from my hand, longer still before he would play or show affection. But once that trust was established, it became unbreakable." Chun looked at Ranger with new understanding. This wasn't just a trained police dog. He was a survivor who had learned to trust again after betrayal. Perhaps that shared experience of trauma and recovery would create a unique connection with Emma Rodriguez. "Officer Kane, I believe you. And Ranger might be exactly what Emma needs. But I have to ask, are you prepared for the possibility that this case might not have a happy ending? Marcus Williams might die from his injuries. His attackers might never be caught. Emma might never find her voice." Kane stood, his hand resting on Ranger's head. "Detective Chun, every child we help find their voice is a victory, regardless of the legal outcome. If Emma Rodriguez can speak about her trauma, if she can reclaim some sense of safety and control over her world, then we've succeeded. The fact that her testimony might also bring criminals to justice is secondary to her. Healing." As Chun drove back to the police station to brief Captain Vasquez on the K-9 assistance plan, she felt cautiously optimistic for the first time since the investigation began. Behind her, Officer Kane was already preparing Ranger for their most important assignment, yet helping a frightened little girl find the courage to speak truth to power, one gentle moment at a time. The Rodriguez apartment felt smaller with 5 adults crowded into the modest living room. But somehow Ranger's presence seemed to expand the space rather than diminish it. The German Shepherd lay in the center of the room like a living piece of furniture, his massive frame completely relaxed, his intelligent brown eyes taking in every detail of his surroundings without appearing threatening or intrusive. Emma had been hiding in her bedroom for the past hour, ever since Detective Chun arrived with Officer Kane and the enormous dog. Through the thin apartment walls, they could hear her moving around, the soft shuffle of feet, the creak of floorboards, the occasional whispered conversation with her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hops. Maria Rodriguez sat on the edge of the couch, ringing her hands nervously as she watched Dr. Sarah Martinez take notes on a clipboard. "This is normal," Dr. Martinez assured the group, her voice barely above a whisper. "Traumatized children often need time to assess new situations before engaging. The fact that she's staying in the apartment rather than trying to leave is actually a positive sign." Officer Kane remained motionless in his chair, following the same protocol he had taught Ranger patients above all else. He had changed out of his uniform into civilian clothes at Dr. Martinez's suggestion, wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans that made him appear less intimidating. His service weapon was locked in his vehicle, another precaution designed to create the most non-threatening environment possible. "How long should we wait?" Detective Chun asked, conscious of the investigation timeline, but willing to defer to the experts. "As long as it takes," Kane replied softly. "I once sat in a hospital room for 6 hours before a child abuse victim felt comfortable enough to approach Ranger. The investment of time up front always pays dividends later." Ranger's ears twitched slightly, the first movement he had made in 20 minutes. A moment later, they all heard it. Emma's bedroom door opening with the softest of clicks. Kane held up a hand, signaling everyone to remain perfectly still. Through the hallway, they could see a small shadow moving along the wall, approaching. The living room with the cautious steps of a woodland creature, testing unfamiliar territory. Emma appeared in the doorway, clutching Mr. Hops against her chest like armor. Her dark eyes immediately found Ranger, studying him with the intense concentration that only children possess. The German shepherd gazed back at her with what Cain had learned to recognize as his gentle giant expression, alert, but completely unthreatening, curious but not demanding. For 10 full minutes, neither the child nor the dog moved. Emma remained frozen in the doorway while Ranger maintained his relaxed position on the carpet. The adults in the room seemed to hold their collective breath, afraid that any sound might break the delicate spell being woven between girl and dog. Then, something magical happened. Emma took a single step into the living room. Ranger's tail gave the slightest wag, not the enthusiastic greeting he might offer to Cain or another familiar person, but a subtle acknowledgement that conveyed both welcome and respect for Emma's boundaries. The little girl noticed immediately, and Cain saw her grip on the stuffed rabbit loosen almost imperceptibly. "Good boy," Dr. Martinez whispered, though it wasn't clear whether she was addressing Ranger or offering encouragement to Emma's brave. "Step forward." Over the next hour, Emma engaged in a careful dance of approach and retreat. She would take 2 steps closer to Ranger, then dart back to the safety of the doorway. Each time she approached, she lingered a little longer, studied the dog a little more intently. Ranger never moved except for the gentle swish of his tail, which seemed to provide a rhythmic reassurance that all was well in his world. Maria Rodriguez watched her daughter with tears streaming silently down her face. It had been months since Emma had shown interest in anything outside her bedroom, longer still since she had approached a stranger willingly. Even Dr. Martinez seemed impressed by the progress, making rapid notes on her clipboard. "He's beautiful," Emma whispered suddenly, her voice so soft that everyone leaned forward to make sure they had heard correctly. Cain's heart raced, but he kept his response measured and calm. "His name is Ranger. Would you like to know more about him?" Emma nodded, still maintaining her distance, but clearly engaged in the conversation. "He's 5 years old, and his favorite things are tennis, balls, and peanut butter treats. He knows how to shake hands, roll over, and play dead. But most of all, he loves meeting new friends." "Does he bite?" Emma asked, the practical concern of a child who had learned to be wary of the world. "Only bad guys who are trying to hurt good people," Cain replied honestly. "But he can tell that you're one of the good people, which is why his tail is wagging." As if on cue, Ranger's tail swept across the carpet in a slow, gentle arc. Emma took another step forward, then another. Soon she was standing just 5 feet away from the massive dog, close enough to see the golden flecks in his brown eyes, close enough to notice how his breathing made his chest rise and fall in a peaceful rhythm. Can I touch him?" she asked. Dr. Martinez caught Cain's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. This was the moment they had been working toward, the first physical contact that would either cement the bond between Emma and Ranger or shatter it completely. "Ranger would like that very much," Cain said. "But we should ask his permission first. In dog language, we do that by holding out our hand and letting him sniff it." Emma looked down at her small hand, then at Ranger's large head, clearly calculating the relative sizes. But curiosity overcame caution, and she extended her trembling fingers toward the German shepherd. Ranger lifted his head slightly and gently sniffed Emma's hand, his wet nose barely brushing her skin. The contact was so brief and gentle that Emma gasped in surprise rather than fear. "He says yes," Cain translated with a smile. With infinite care, Emma placed her palm on top of Ranger's head. The German shepherd's fur was softer than she had expected, warm and thick beneath her fingers. Ranger closed his eyes contentedly, leaning slightly into her touch. Not enough to unbalance her, but just enough to show that he enjoyed the contact. "Oh," Emma breathed, wonder filling her voice. "He likes me." "He loves you already, Kane." Confirmed, and for the first time since her father's death, Emma Rodriguez smiled. Detective Chun felt tears pricking her eyes as she witnessed the breakthrough. In that moment of connection between a traumatized child and a rescued dog, she saw the first glimmer of hope that justice might be possible after all. But more importantly, she saw the beginning of Emma's journey back to trust, back to her own voice, back to a world where good things could still happen despite all the darkness she had witnessed. The healing had begun, one gentle touch at a time. By the fifth visit, Emma Rodriguez had claimed her spot on the living room carpet directly beside Ranger, her small frame curled against the German Shepherd's warm flank, like she had found her missing piece. The transformation over the past week had been remarkable, from a frightened child hiding in closets to a little girl who giggled softly when Ranger's tail accidentally tickled her face, who shared her graham crackers with him during their sessions, and who had begun speaking in whispers about school, her dollhouse, and her dreams. Officer Kane sat in his usual chair, no longer a stranger but a familiar presence who brought her favorite furry friend. Detective Chun positioned herself across the room, close enough to hear but far enough away to remain non-threatening. Dr. Martinez continued taking notes, documenting Emma's progress with professional satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that they were approaching the most crucial phase of the process. "Ranger missed you yesterday," Kane said gently, running his hand through the dog's thick coat. "When we went to training, he kept looking around like he was searching for his favorite little friend." Emma's face lit up with pure joy. "Really? He was looking for me?" "Absolutely. Police dogs are very loyal. Once they choose, they're special. People, they remember them forever." Emma buried her face in Ranger's fur, inhaling his clean, earthy scent. "I dreamed about him last night. We were playing in a big field with lots of flowers, and he was chasing butterflies, but being very gentle, so he wouldn't hurt them." "That sounds like a wonderful dream," Dr. Martinez said encouragingly. "Ranger would love a field full of butterflies." The conversation had been flowing naturally for 20 minutes when Emma suddenly grew quiet, her expression becoming serious. She continued petting Ranger, but her movements became slower, more thoughtful. The adults in the room sensed the shift immediately. Recognizing the signs they had been waiting for, Emma was ready to talk about something important. "Officer Kane," Emma said softly, not looking up from Ranger's fur. "Bad things happen to good people sometimes, don't they?" Kane felt his pulse quicken, but kept his voice steady. "Yes, sweetheart, they do. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to help the good people when bad things happen." Emma nodded solemnly. "Like how Ranger helps people even though bad things happened to him when he was little? Exactly like that. Ranger knows what it feels like to be scared, so he's extra good at helping other people who are scared." Emma was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns in Ranger's coat. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "Mr. Williams is a good person." Detective Chun's breath caught in her throat, but she forced herself to remain perfectly still. This was the moment they had been building toward, the breakthrough that could change everything. "Yes, he is," Kane agreed gently. "Mr. Williams is a very good person who helps lots of people." "The bad men hurt him," Emma whispered, and Ranger seemed to sense her distress, shifting slightly so his head rested more comfortably against her. "Leg, can you tell us about the bad men, Mia?" Dr. Martinez asked softly, using the Spanish endearment that Emma's mother always used. Emma was quiet for so long that the adults wondered if they had pushed too far too fast. But then, with her eyes fixed on Ranger's gentle face, she began to speak. "I was playing with my dollhouse by the window. The little family was having dinner, and I was making the mama doll serve enchiladas like Mama makes for me. Her voice grew stronger as she lost herself in the memory. Then I heard shouting from outside. At first, I thought it was just teenagers being loud, but it sounded ... angry. Scary angry. Kane nodded encouragingly. What did you do when you heard the shouting? I looked out my window. Mr. Williams was in the parking lot, and there were 3 men with him. But they weren't friends. I could tell because Mr. Williams had his hands up like this. Emma demonstrated, raising her small hands in surrender, and he was backing away from them. Detective Chun began taking notes, her hands steady despite the excitement building in her chest. The 3 men looked mean, Emma continued, her confidence growing with each word. The first one was wearing a blue jacket, not dark blue like Daddy's old coat, but bright blue like the sky, and it had a silver zipper that went all the way up to his neck. I could see it shining in the sun. That's very good, Emma. What about the other 2 men? Emma closed her eyes, concentrating. One of them had a tattoo on his neck. It looked like a snake, all black and twisty, climbing up from under his shirt. When he turned his head, I could see its eyes and its tongue. She shuddered slightly, and Ranger nuzzled her hand reassuringly. And the 3rd man? He was really tall, taller than Officer Kane even. And when he smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile, it was a mean smile, I could see his teeth were all yellow and gross. Emma wrinkled her nose in disgust. Detective Chun's pulse raced. These descriptions were incredibly detailed, far more specific than anything they had hoped for from a traumatized 7-year-old witness. Emma, you're being very brave by telling us this, Kane said. Can you remember anything else about what happened? Emma's voice grew smaller again. They had baseball bats. A tall man pulled his out first, and then the others did too. Mr. Williams tried to run, but they were faster. Tears began to form in her eyes. They hit him and hit him, and he fell down, and there was blood on the ground, and his papers from his briefcase were blowing around like leaves. Oh, sweetheart, Dr. Martinez murmured, but Emma wasn't finished. Then they took his wallet and his phone, and the man with the snake tattoo took his car keys. But here's the thing. Emma looked up at Detective Chun for the first time during her recounting, her eyes bright with the importance of what she was about to reveal. Everyone keeps saying they drove away in a black car, but that's not right. It was a blue truck, not a car. A pickup truck with no back door. You know, the part that opens up. No tailgate, Chun breathed. Yes, and it was old and rusty, and it made a really loud noise when they drove away, like it was coughing. The room fell silent as the adults absorbed the significance of Emma's revelation. She had just provided them with specific, actionable details that could break the case wide open. But more importantly, she had found the courage to speak her truth, to transform her trauma into testimony that could help ensure justice for Mr. Williams. Emma looked around at the adults, suddenly aware of their intense attention. Did I do good? Will this help catch the bad men? Kane reached over and gently squeezed her shoulder. Emma, you did something incredibly brave and important today. You might have just saved Mr. Williams and helped make sure those bad men can't hurt anyone else. As Emma smiled and buried her face back in Ranger's comforting fur, Detective Chun was already mentally cataloging the new information. A blue pickup truck with no tailgate, driven by 3 specific individuals whose descriptions now had the clarity needed for positive identification. A case that had seemed impossible just days ago suddenly felt solvable. The little girl who had lost her voice to trauma had found it again through the patient love of a rescue dog, and in doing so, she had given justice its voice as well. Detective Sarah Chun burst through the doors of the Denver Police Department at 6:47 a.m., her arms loaded with coffee and boxes of donuts fuel for what she knew would be a marathon investigative session. Emma Rodriguez's detailed testimony had given them their first real break in the Marcus Williams case, and Chun was determined to capitalize on every lead before the trail could grow any colder. The Major Crimes Unit was already buzzing with activity despite the early hour. Detective Luis Rodriguez had arrived at 6 a.m. and was hunched over his computer, scrolling through traffic camera footage with the intensity of a man possessed. Crime scene analyst Jennifer Walsh was spreading enlarged photographs across every available surface, and Captain Maria Vasquez stood in the center of it all, orchestrating the controlled chaos with military precision. "Tell me you found something," Chun said, distributing coffee to her bleary-eyed colleagues. "Better than something," Rodriguez replied without looking up from his screen. "I found everything." Emma's description of the blue pickup truck with the missing tailgate was the key we needed. "I went back through all the traffic camera footage from a 6-block radius, specifically looking for blue pickups instead of dark sedans." He clicked the key, and the wall-mounted television displayed a grainy but unmistakable image of a blue Ford F-150 with a missing tailgate, captured by a traffic camera at 4:23 p.m. on the day of the attack, just 6 minutes after the assault on Marcus Williams. "License plate is partially visible," Walsh noted, pointing at the screen. "I can make out the first 3 characters, 7G Delta." Captain Vasquez pulled up the Department of Motor Vehicles database on her tablet. Colorado plates beginning with 7GD. That narrows it down to approximately 43 vehicles statewide. How many of those are blue Ford pickups? Rodriguez's fingers flew across his keyboard. Cross-referencing now. Got it. 7 blue Ford F-150s in the Denver metro area with plates beginning 7GD. He paused, his expression growing grim. One of them is registered to Jake Morrison, 2347 Blake Street. Released from Colorado State Penitentiary 6 months ago after serving 3 years for armed robbery and aggravated assault. The name hung in the air like an electric charge. Morrison had been one of their initial suspects based on his criminal history and recent release, but without evidence connecting him to the scene, they had been unable to move forward. "What's the status of that vehicle?" Sean asked. Walsh consulted. Her notes. Reported stolen 4 days ago by Morrison. Claims it was taken from the parking lot of his halfway house sometime during the night. "Convenient," Captain Vasquez said dryly. "Except our traffic cameras show it being driven 6 blocks from the crime scene before it was allegedly stolen." Rodriguez pulled up additional footage on his second monitor. "I've got more. Same truck, different camera, captured at 4:31 p.m., heading north on Federal Boulevard. And here," he switched to a third image, 4:37 p.m., turning into the parking lot of Big Eddie's Auto Salvage on the north side. Chun felt the pieces clicking together in her mind. Big Eddie's has been suspected of running a chop shop operation for years, but we've never been able to prove it. Because they're very good at making vehicles disappear completely, Captain Vasquez noted. But they weren't expecting us to have this much video evidence. Crime scene analyst Walsh spread out a series of blown-up photographs on the conference table. "I've been working on enhancing the images we have of the suspects from the apartment complex security camera. Emma's descriptions allowed me to focus on specific features." She pointed to a shadowy figure in a blue jacket. Height approximately 6 feet, medium build, consistent with Jake Morrison's physical profile. The blue jacket Emma described matches the color and style visible in this frame. Moving to a second photograph, she continued. "This figure shows distinctive markings on the neck area that could be the snake tattoo Emma described. Cross-referencing with booking photos ... Walsh pulled up a mugshot on her laptop. Tony Gutierrez. Arrested 18 months ago on weapons charges. Known associate of Jake Morrison. Note the serpent tattoo extending from his collar line up to his left ear. The final photograph showed a tall, thin silhouette, height approximately 6'4", consistent with David Park's arrest records. Park was released from county jail 2 months ago after serving time for assault with a deadly weapon. Detective Chun studied the evidence spread before them. So we have Morrison's truck at the scene, all 3 suspects matching Emma's descriptions, and a established pattern of criminal association. What about their alibis for Tuesday afternoon? Rodriguez consulted his files. Morrison claims he was at his halfway house doing mandatory community service cleaning the common areas. House supervisor says he can't confirm Morrison's exact whereabouts between 3 o'clock and 6 p.m. because residents aren't required to check in every hour. Gutierrez told his parole officer he was job hunting, but has no specific locations or contacts to verify his activities. Park was supposed to be at his cousin's house in Commerce City, but the cousin is currently in jail on unrelated charges, so we can't verify that alibi either. Captain Vasquez made notes on her legal pad. Convenient. Alibis that are impossible to verify. What about physical evidence from the scene? Walsh opened another file folder. We collected blood samples from the parking lot, presumably from the victim. But I also found something interesting: fragments of blue fabric caught on the chain link fence surrounding the dumpster area. The fabric appears to be from a nylon windbreaker, consistent with the jacket Emma described. DNA analysis? In progress. Should have results within 48 hours. But Detective Chun, there's something else. Walsh's voice carried a note of excitement. I went back to the scene yesterday with Emma's testimony in mind. She mentioned that Marcus Williams' papers were scattered by the wind from his briefcase. Walsh produced an evidence bag containing several sheets of paper. I found these lodged under a parked car 50 feet from the assault site. They're student essays that Williams was apparently grading, covered in his handwritten comments. But look at this. She pointed to dark stains on one of the papers. This appears to be blood spatter, but not from the victim. The pattern suggests it came from someone standing over Williams during the attack, possibly from a cut or scrape on the attacker's hand. Detective Chun felt her excitement building. If we can match that blood to any of our suspects ... we have them cold, Captain Vasquez finished. Rodriguez, I want surveillance teams on all 3 suspects immediately. Chun, coordinate with the district attorney's office. If the DNA comes back positive, I want arrest warrants prepared. As the team dispersed to execute their assignments, Chun reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A traumatized 7-year-old girl, unable to speak for days, had provided the crucial testimony that was now leading to what looked like solid arrests in a case of brutal violence. But even as the investigation gained momentum, Chun knew that Emma's ordeal was far from over. The little girl who had found her voice with the help of a gentle German shepherd would soon face her greatest testifying in a courtroom filled with strangers, with the 3 men who had haunted her nightmares sitting just feet away. The evidence was strong, but justice would ultimately depend on whether Emma Rodriguez could maintain her newfound courage when it mattered most. Detective Chun made a silent promise to herself and to Emma. No matter what happened next, she would ensure that the brave little girl who had broken her silence to seek justice would have every protection and support the law could provide. Marcus Williams deserved justice, but Emma Rodriguez deserved safety, healing, and the chance to reclaim her childhood from the shadows of trauma. As Chun prepared to call Officer Kane and Ranger, she realized that their work was just beginning. The Denver District Attorney's Office had never seen a case quite like this one. District Attorney Linda Walsh stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the early morning traffic crawl through the city streets below, while contemplating the most challenging prosecution decision of her 15-year career. Behind her, The case files for People versus Morrison, Gutierrez, and Park spread across her mahogany desk like pieces of a complex puzzle finally coming together. The DNA evidence had been conclusive. Blood found on Marcus Williams' scattered papers matched David Park's genetic profile. Apparently, the tall attacker had cut his hand on Williams' car keys during the robbery. Security footage placed Morrison's truck at the scene within minutes of the attack. Fiber analysis confirmed that fabric caught on the crime scene fence matched the jacket Jake Morrison was wearing in a convenience store security video taken just hours before the assault. But the cornerstone of the prosecution's case remained the testimony of 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez, and that presented Linda Walsh with a moral and legal dilemma that kept her awake at night. The defense will argue that a traumatized child's testimony is inherently unreliable, said Assistant District Attorney Michael Chun, reviewing his legal briefs for the third time that morning. They'll claim that the presence of a police dog during testimony constitutes undue influence on the jury. Walsh turned from the window, her expression resolute. Then we'll have to prove them wrong. Dr. Sarah Martinez's psychological evaluation confirms that Emma is competent to testify. Her recall of events is remarkably detailed and consistent across multiple interviews. Child advocacy attorney Rebecca Torres looked up from her own stack of papers. I've reviewed similar cases from 12 other jurisdictions where therapy animals were permitted during child testimony. The legal precedent is solid, but we need to be prepared for aggressive cross-examination. The intercom on Walsh's desk buzzed softly. Miss Walsh, Officer Kane, and Detective Chun are here for the 10 o'clock meeting. Send them in. Officer. Jake Kane entered the office with Ranger, walking calmly beside him, the German Shepherd's presence immediately changing the atmosphere from tense legal, strategizing to something warmer and more hopeful. Detective Sarah Chun followed, carrying a folder thick with interview transcripts and progress reports. How is Emma handling the pressure? Walsh asked without preamble. Kane settled into his chair, while Ranger took his customary position on the carpet. She's remarkable, honestly. Yesterday, we did a full walk-through of the courthouse after hours. She sat in the witness chair, practiced speaking into the microphone, and even rehearsed pointing to the defendant's table. Any signs of distress? Some anxiety, which is normal. But as long as Ranger is with her, she maintains her composure. The bond between them has become her source of strength. Detective Chun opened her folder. We've documented 17 practice sessions over the past 2 weeks. Emma's testimony has remained consistent in every detail. She's ready, but we need to protect her from unnecessary trauma during cross-examination. Walsh nodded thoughtfully. Judge Patricia Montgomery has agreed to several accommodations. The courtroom will be closed to media and spectators except for essential personnel. Emma will be allowed to have Ranger with her throughout her testimony. And if she becomes too distressed, we can request immediate recess. Assistant Day Chun raised a concern. The defense attorneys are Richard Blackwood, Maria Santos, and Thomas Kim, all experienced criminal lawyers who won't hesitate to use aggressive tactics. They'll try to confuse Emma, challenge her memory, and suggest that her testimony has been coached. Which is why our preparation has to be perfect, Torres replied. Emma needs to understand that it's okay to say, I don't know, or I don't remember, if she's uncertain about anything. Honesty and simplicity will be more powerful than trying to have perfect recall of every detail. Kane leaned forward in his chair. There's something else to consider. Marcus Williams regained consciousness yesterday. The room fell silent. This was the development they had all hoped for, but hadn't dared expect. His condition? Walsh asked. Stable, but still serious. He has some memory loss, but he clearly remembers leaving his office that Tuesday afternoon to go home. He doesn't remember the attack itself, but he recalls seeing Emma Rodriguez playing on her balcony earlier that day and waving to her. Detective Chun smiled. Emma will be so relieved to know he's awake. She's been asking about him in every session. Walsh made notes on her legal pad. William's recovery strengthens our case emotionally, but Emma's testimony remains crucial for the actual convictions. Without her eyewitness account, we have circumstantial evidence, but no direct identification of the attackers. The group spent the next hour reviewing every aspect of Emma's upcoming testimony. They discussed the order of questions, potential defense objections, and contingency plans if Emma became overwhelmed. Torres had prepared visual aids, a simple diagram of the apartment complex that would help Emma orient the jury without requiring her to relive the trauma in excessive detail. What about the defendants? Kane asked. How do we prepare Emma for seeing them in person? Walsh's expression hardened. All three are out on bail, despite our objections. Morrison, Gutierrez, and Park will be sitting at the defense table just 20 feet from the witness stand. Emma will have to look at them and identify them as the men who attacked Marcus Williams. She's practiced this, Detective Chun assured the group. We showed her photographs during our sessions, and she identified each of them without hesitation. But seeing them in person will be different. Torres pulled out a courtroom diagram. We've arranged the seating so that Emma won't have to turn her head to see the defendants. Ranger will be positioned between her and the defense table, providing both physical and psychological comfort. As the meeting concluded, Kane remained behind to speak privately with Walsh. Miss Walsh, I need you to understand something about Emma Rodriguez. This little girl has already shown more courage than most adults demonstrate in their entire lives. She's chosen to speak truth to power, to face her fears in order to seek justice for someone else. Whatever happens in that courtroom, she's already won the most important battle. Walsh nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Officer Kane, I promise you this. Emma Rodriguez will be treated with the dignity, respect, and protection she deserves. This prosecution isn't just about convicting 3 criminals. It's about honoring the bravery of a child who refused to let trauma silence her voice. That evening, Emma Rodriguez sat on her living room floor with Ranger's head in her lap, practicing her testimony one final time. Her mother, Maria, watched from the kitchen doorway with tears in her eyes as her daughter spoke clearly and confidently about the most frightening experience of her young life. Tomorrow is the big day, isn't it, Ranger? Emma whispered to the German shepherd. We're going to help make sure the bad men can't hurt anyone else. Ranger's tail wagged softly against the carpet, and Emma smiled with a confidence that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. She had found her voice through love, patience, and the unwavering loyalty of a 4-legged friend. Tomorrow, she would use that voice to speak for justice itself. The stage was set. The evidence was prepared, and a little girl and her dog were ready to change the course of justice forever. The Denver County Courthouse had never felt as heavy with anticipation as it did on the morning of October 15th. By 8:30 a.m., a crowd of reporters, curious citizens, and legal observers had gathered outside the building, despite Judge Patricia Montgomery's ruling that the courtroom would be closed to media and spectators during Emma Rodriguez's testimony. Word had spread throughout the legal community about the unprecedented case, a 7-year-old girl with selective mutism who would testify with a police dog by her side against 3 violent criminals. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Emma Rodriguez sat in a small chair beside the witness stand, her legs barely reaching the floor, wearing the new blue dress her mother had bought specially for this day. The dress matched the color of Ranger's collar, a detail Emma had insisted upon because she wanted them to look like a team. Ranger lay calmly at her feet, his massive frame a comforting presence in the intimidating legal arena. Officer Jake, Kane sat in the front row, close enough to offer Emma encouragement with his presence, but far enough away to avoid any appearance of coaching. His uniform was pressed to perfection, his posture military straight, but his eyes revealed the deep emotion of a man who had watched a traumatized child transform into a beacon of courage. District Attorney Linda Walsh stood at the prosecution table, reviewing her notes one final time. Across the aisle, defense attorneys Richard Blackwood, Maria Santos, and Thomas Kim huddled in whispered conversation with their clients. Jake Morrison, Tony Gutierrez, and David Park sat at the defendant's table in ill-fitting suits, their presence casting a shadow over the entire proceedings. Judge Montgomery entered the courtroom at precisely 9 a.m., her black robes flowing behind her like wings of justice. The bailiff called the court to order, and Emma felt her heart begin to race. Ranger sensed her anxiety immediately, lifting his head to rest it gently against her knee, a gesture so natural and comforting that several jurors smiled despite the gravity of the proceedings. The prosecution may call its next witness, Judge Montgomery announced. Your Honor, the people call Emma Rodriguez to the stand. Emma stood on shaky legs, her small hand reaching instinctively for Ranger's collar. Officer Kane had trained both of them for this moment. Ranger would walk beside her to the witness stand, lie down at the designated spot, and remain there throughout her testimony. As they approached the witness box, defense attorney Richard Blackwood rose from his chair. Objection, Your Honor. The presence of a police dog during testimony is highly prejudicial and will unduly influence the jury. This is a blatant attempt to manipulate the emotions of the court. Judge Montgomery's gavel struck sharply. Mr. Blackwood, we discussed this matter extensively during pre-trial hearings. The court has ruled that the therapy animal is necessary to enable this witness to testify. Your objection is overruled. Emma climbed into the witness chair, her feet dangling freely as the bailiff adjusted the microphone to her height. Ranger settled into position at the base of the witness stand, his brown eyes fixed on Emma's face with unwavering devotion. The sight of the small girl and the large dog created a tableau that would be remembered by everyone in the courtroom for the rest of their lives. District Attorney Walsh approached the witness stand with gentle deliberation. Good morning, Emma. Would you please tell the court your name and age? My name is Emma Rodriguez, and I'm 7 years old, Emma replied, her voice clear but soft. Emma, do you remember what happened on Tuesday, October 1st, when you were playing by your bedroom window? Emma's gaze flicked briefly to the defendant's table, where the three men who had haunted her nightmares sat in stark reality. For a moment, her courage wavered, and she looked down at Ranger. The German shepherd's tail gave the slightest wag, as if saying, I'm here. You're safe. Tell your truth. Yes, I remember, Emma said, her voice growing stronger. I saw 3 bad men hurt Mr. Williams in the parking lot. Walsh guided Emma through her testimony with masterful care, allowing the child to tell her story at her own pace. Emma described the blue jacket with the silver zipper, the snake tattoo crawling up a man's neck, the tall attacker with yellow teeth. She explained how they beat Marcus Williams with baseball bats, stole his belongings, and fled in a blue pickup truck with no tailgate. The courtroom was absolutely silent, except for Emma's clear voice recounting the brutal attack. Several jurors wiped away tears as they listened to the child's unflinching honesty. When Walsh asked Emma to identify the attackers, Emma pointed to each defendant without hesitation, her voice never wavering as she said, That's the man with the blue jacket. That's the man with the snake tattoo. And that's the very tall man with the yellow teeth. Then came the moment everyone had dreaded, cross-examination. Defense Attorney Blackwood rose from his chair like a predator sensing weakness. His strategy was clear. Overwhelm the child witness, confuse her testimony, and create reasonable doubt through aggressive questioning. Emma, Blackwood began, his voice deceptively gentle. "Isn't it true that you were very far away from this alleged incident? 3 stories up in your apartment?" Emma nodded. "Yes, sir." "And isn't it possible that from such a distance, you might have been mistaken about what you saw? Perhaps you imagined some of these details?" Emma's confidence began to falter under the attorney's relentless questioning. Her voice grew smaller as Blackwood pressed harder, suggesting that she had been coached, that her memory was unreliable, that a 7-year-old couldn't possibly remember such specific details weeks after a traumatic event. "Emma," Blackwood continued, his voice growing more aggressive, "isn't it true that you've had problems speaking since your father died? How can we trust the testimony of a child who doesn't even talk normally?" The courtroom erupted. "Objection!" District Attorney Walsh shouted. "Counsel is badgering the witness." But the damage was done. Emma's eyes filled with tears as the defense attorney's words cut deep into her most vulnerable places. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, and for a terrible moment, it seemed like the brave little girl might retreat back into her protective silence. In that moment of crisis, Emma looked down at Ranger. The German shepherd gazed back at her with such pure love and loyalty that something shifted in the child's heart. This dog had been abandoned and mistreated, yet he had learned to trust again. He had found his voice through service to others, just as she had found hers through their friendship. Emma reached down and placed her small hand on Ranger's head. The courtroom held its collective breath as she spoke 2 simple words that would echo through legal history. "Good boy." The spontaneous expression of love and trust between child and dog created a moment of such authentic emotion that it transformed the entire atmosphere of the courtroom. The jurors saw not a coached witness or a legal strategy, but the pure heart of a brave little girl who had overcome her deepest fears to seek justice for someone she cared about. Defense Attorney Blackwood's aggressive demeanor crumbled in the face of such genuine innocence. Judge Montgomery called for a brief recess, as Emma's simple words reverberated through the chamber. When court resumed, the defense offered no further questions. The jury deliberated for just 47 minutes before returning guilty verdicts on all charges for all 3 defendants. Jake Morrison, Tony Gutierrez, and David Park were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, and Marcus Williams, who had made a full recovery, was in the courtroom to thank the brave little girl who had found her voice to seek justice for him. As Emma Rodriguez walked out of the courthouse that day, her hand in Officer Kane's, while Ranger trotted proudly beside them, she had become more than just a witness to a crime. She had become a symbol of courage, resilience, and the power of love to overcome even the darkest trauma. 2 words, "good boy," had changed everything, proving that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest power to heal the world.